Hey, welcome to church today. It is so great that you have joined us. And especially if this is your first time, you are so welcome. My name is Florent and I am joining you from Kigali, Rwanda. Just incredible. I love my church. We are one church, many locations. We get to do church together on a Sunday across the world. It's just incredible. And wherever you're watching from, if you are online, would you just go ahead and type in the comment section. Just tell us where you're watching from. Or if you are in one of our venues, we would love to get to know you. Speak to one of our host team members. They will love to get in touch with you. And another good thing is that you can follow us on social media. Go ahead and just give us a follow. We want you to get updated with everything that is happening across our church. Guys, it is so great to have you today. You are welcome. Now, in Freedom Church, we have what we call our DNA. These are 12 core values that make up who we are as a church. And today, we just want to introduce you to one of them, which is called Relevant to Our Time. And I'm going to read for you what it says. It says that we will share an ageless message that engages the next generation and is easily understood by unchurched people. We will adapt our methods and lay down our preferences for the times and cultures that we are called to reach. Now, Freedom Church has been changing during the years, and you are going to hear some of that today. We are in this series called FIRESTARTERS, the chapters, and it's been an amazing and powerful series full of powerful testimonies, and you are going to love it. I know that it's been igniting your faith, just like it's been igniting my faith too. If you want to get more out of this series, we have podcasts that you can listen to. We also have a 5-day devotional that you can actually take part in on the YouVersion app. Another exciting news is that we have the FIRESTARTERS book now available. You can get your copy in one of our locations, or you can just go online and purchase your own copy. We are going to hear some of the people that have been impacted by this book. They have just read some few of the chapters of this book, and it's been incredible. Let's listen.
So I have just finished reading the first 3 chapters of the FIRESTARTERS book. I can't wait to get my hands on a copy of the full book and to enjoy and absorb all of the stories that are in it. I might even read it in one sitting. I think I probably will.
I cannot tell you how pumped I am for the release of FIRESTARTERS. This is going to be so pivotal for us as a church, but it's going to reach so many people beyond our church.
At the start of chapter 1, where Pastor Gary unveiled the plans of church planting, which is 10-4, I cried and I was filled with emotions to see how God moved in each of their lives. I'm eager to get my hands on the whole book to read all the stories of how an audacious yes by Pastor G and H has brought so many others to Christ, not only in their own town, but across the globe, including me and my family.
The analogy of Jesus being a roaring lion versus a cuddly lamb, that has really challenged me in my way of thinking about Jesus.
But in the first couple of chapters so far, it says about when you look into the eyes of the lion, you find calling and purpose. And for myself, I'm just finding myself reawakened, finding that calling, or these different areas of life that find purpose.
This idea that Jesus is the Lion of Judah, who we understand Jesus to be, his character and his nature, has an impact and will determine what we model our own character on as Christians. And so it was a real challenge to me to reflect, to really take some time to absorb that chapter and to read the questions that it provoked, reflect on whether I have shrunk or diminished my understanding of Jesus as the lion.
So what stuck out for me was the fact that Pastor G and Pastor H were given this vision, and this must have been really scary, and they may have tried talking themselves out of it, but they didn't, and they trusted God and they went with this vision, and so many lives have been changed around the world because of it.
I think this book would be really great for my family. God as a roaring lion is not really preached, so I think that would be great for them, and I think this book is going to be amazing for people that are already existing Christians, but are on the lukewarm side and needs a bit of a nudge and encouragement.
I would really love to give this book to my parents, because I would love for them to understand that being a Christian is not just going to church and doing churchy things, but to live life doing uncomfortable and audacious things.
I will be sharing this book with my children. They are both believers, but I believe that it will change their thinking. I believe God will speak to them through it. I believe it will change them. And not only will I just be giving it to my children, but I'm also going to share it with non-believers as well, because who knows, they may have a little seed there already planted, and me giving them that book and then having discussions afterwards, that seed may grow and then it may cause a spark, and let's face it, we all know what a spark means. It can turn into a wildfire.
It's so good to be joining you wherever you are in this moment. Maybe you are at home, perhaps you're gathering with a small group of friends and family. Maybe you're in one of our venues, but today we're going to come and lift up our praise and our thankfulness to God. So whatever that looks like for you, maybe you can stand to your feet, get ready to bring a sacrifice of praise as we worship our God today. Come on, church, all around the world. We're gonna sing, You Make It Easy. You make it easy to love. You are good and you are good. You bring joy into make it easy to trust. You have never left me, son. You've been faithful every time. And all I want is you, Jesus. All I want is you. You're the refuge. You are the refuge I run to. You are the fire that leads me through the night. I'll follow you anywhere. There's a million reasons to trust you. Nothing to fear, for you are by my side. Oh, I'll follow you anywhere. Follow you anywhere. Come on, church. Let's worship him today. Jesus, you came. Jesus, you came to my rescue. You took my place upon that cross. You redeemed what I had lost. Now my whole world revolving around you. Come on, lift it up. You're the center of my life. You're the treasure. You're the prize. All I want is you, Jesus. All that I want is you. You are the refuge I run to. You are the fire that leads me through the night. I'll follow you anywhere. There's a million reasons to trust you. Nothing to fear, for you are by my side. I'll follow you anywhere. Come on, freedom! Whoa, follow you anywhere. Whoa, let's sing it again. I want is you. Wherever you lead me, whatever it costs me, all I want is you. Jesus, all I want. In this moment, would you just take some time to think about that prayer? Because it's a significant statement of faith that wherever He would lead us, whatever He would call of us, that knowing Him will be our highest priority. In this moment, I want to encourage you to respond to God. Maybe you need to lift your hands. You might be on your own at home. Your neighbors might be watching in or looking at you, but come and worship Him today. Raise your hands in celebration of what He's going to do. It's a declaration of faith that I want to follow God wherever He would lead me. Maybe in this moment you want to kneel. Perhaps there's something you've been wrestling with God about, something that you're finding hard to let go of, but this is a moment of surrender and commitment. Maybe this is a moment as a family to hold hands and make that declaration that you'll always say yes to Jesus. Perhaps this is the moment to write down that commitment to what He's been calling you to say, I'm going to do it, Lord. I'm going to step out in faith. Church, let God move in this moment. Come, Lord. Come, Lord. Come, Father, in every room, in every venue, God. Lord, across India, Lord, in this moment, the courage to step out where there's been failure before. Redemption is your name, Jesus. All across Africa, America, here in Europe, in the UK. Church, we're going to sing those words in one more moment. Would you come and make that declaration with me? That wherever He leads us, all we want is Him. You ready? Wherever you lead me, whatever it costs me, all I want is you. All I want is you. Come on, church. Wherever you lead me, whatever pressed on each side, we will not lose sight of the one who's greater. Come on, sing it out. One name holds every victory. One voice that silences the enemy. One king who reigns for all eternity. Lift his name, Jesus, Jesus. On the battlefield, your power is revealed. Giants fall defeated. Come on, let's lift our hands in this place. Come on. We are taking ground. Walls are falling down in the mighty name of Jesus. And again, one day, holds every victory. One voice that silences the enemy. One king who reigns for all eternity. Father, we thank you that every victory is yours. Every victory, in every way. Father, for justice, for peace, for unity, for healing, for breakthrough. It's yours, Lord. Every victory is yours. Every victory is yours. You rose. You reign. Death is buried in the grave. Hell cannot define me. You rose. You rose. And every victory is yours. Every victory is yours. You rose. Death is buried in the grave. Hell cannot defy your reign. You rose. You reign. One day, come on. One day. Come on, lift it up. One voice that silences the enemy. Let's go. King who reigns for all. Jesus, Jesus. One name, come on. One name. One voice that silences the enemy. One king who reigns. Jesus. One name, one name. That silences the enemy. One king who reigns. Jesus, Jesus,
A few years went by, and what had started as a sparky fire was now becoming roaring flames. There was new confidence and fresh momentum. We had been obedient in taking the step to come over to Hereford, and God began to give us an upgrade. There was renovation happening in our worship, our leadership, and our vision. We started to have prophetic input again from Clem Ferris, and he kept prophesying things directly and indirectly that said, Freedom Church is going to change the world. He had never said it like this before in all the years of ministering into our church. Now he was repeating it again and again. We'd been leading for 20 years by this point and had never heard such bold statements about what God was going to do through us. We were ready for it. We believed it. God was shaking us and preparing us as he was about to do something powerful through this small church in Hereford. As the church grew and after years of hiring spaces for church, we knew that it was time to get our own building again. We searched through the properties of Hereford to find something that would fit our tribe. Chris and Karen Cook were a part of our leadership team at the time and lived in Hereford, so they offered to take a lead on the hunt for a home. After months of praying into it, Karen was walking down Coningsby Street where she saw a warehouse, an old plumb centre. She could see a man measuring it up and caught his attention through the window. She found out that he was measuring it up so that it would be leased out. She told him not to put it on the market and to send her the details instead. It was an empty shell and needed a lot of work to be usable. No heating, no insulation, and we would later find out there were some serious drainage issues. Hereford City Centre was undergoing a major redevelopment with millions of pounds being spent on a new shopping centre, restaurant strip and access roads. The development group was called the Egger Street Grid. The access road to change the traffic system of Hereford was going right through the building that we were trying to get planning permission for. The director of the ESG had all the planning documents for the city centre across his desk, and when he saw ours, he called me and arranged a meeting. When we met together in his executive office, he was very clear with me. Stay away from that building. He showed me the plans for the city and how they intended to build a new road through the old warehouse. We can force your landlord to sell the building to the ESG, as we have the governmental and local mandate for the regeneration of the city. It's called a compulsory purchase order, a CPO. And if you make all these renovations, you would lose everything you have invested into it. I told him I'd go away and pray and consider what he said. It was an incredibly difficult decision, and I was leaning into God more than ever before. The council came back and gave us a temporary planning permission for 12 months while they looked at it further for the long term. I shared the journey with the church so they could be praying and standing with us. One of the small group leaders came to me, serious and earnest. You could tell that he had something important to say. I want you to know something. If we go for this and we take the lease on the building, make all the renovations to it and spend every penny we have, then they take it from us, I will still back you. I will still believe in you and the vision that God has given you. I was stunned. Sometimes you get stirred and encouraged from the places you don't expect, but it gave me the courage I needed. I prayed, I sought counsel, and I still felt the same conviction that this was the building God was calling us to. Despite the limited permissions of just a year, and regardless of threats of a multi-million-pound government-backed organisation, I had to follow what God was leading us to. We set our people to work on clearing out the dirty, tired old place, and it was a picture of joy. People with sledgehammers and smiles covered in dust and dancing as they worked. God had given us land in the city, a place of our own. It would be a staging ground for invasions all around the globe to advance the gospel. We moved in March 2009, and it was an incredible time of growth. There was a buzz about the place, another fresh wave of momentum as we opened our doors. I decided the only way to open my sermon was with a zip wire. So when it was time for the message, I zipped from the balcony down to the stage. We were building the kingdom passionately, but we were going to have some fun along the way too. We opened up our building for the community and made it available to charities and organisations that would want to hire the space. We used for parent and toddler groups, drama groups, dance groups. It was vibrant and always filled with different people using it and enjoying the spaces we had created. After about a year, we had a booking from the ESG. They were using it as a meeting place for one of their planning meetings. I saw the director of the ESG and he asked to meet with me again. I was intrigued to know what was going to happen next. Was he going to make his move to force us out? He looked at me and said, "You didn't listen to me, did you?" I grinned, still wondering what he was thinking. He continued, "Well, we love what you have done with the building. It has become a real centre for the community. The ESG isn't just about commercial regeneration, it's about community regeneration. And what you have been doing is an amazing example of what we want to see." I try to restrain myself from punching the air and bellowing the name of Jesus. He went on to tell me that they had redrawn and restructured the entire access road to allow us to stay where we were. They no longer had plans to knock down our building and saw us as a key part of regenerating the community. The change had cost them lots of money. God had rewarded our faith once again, even when it felt like the odds were against us.
We are just excited about what God is doing, and there is seriousness, there is tears for God, and there is joy and laughter in His house.
Hello church, my name's Josh and I am so excited to get to share with you the next part of this Firestarters series. It is such a privilege to be able to share this word with you today. I've been involved with this book for the last 3 years and I can't believe that you can finally get yourself a copy. It's just amazing. And I just want to encourage you that this book, it was designed to ignite a faith, provoke a fire in the soul. And so as well as getting this book for yourself, I just want to encourage you, who have you got a vision to get it for? Is there someone in your world right now that you think they need to have their fire stoked? They need to have their faith ignited. Get this story into their hands. It's like, this is what it's been designed for. So this book, it's available. Get your hands on a copy. Make it happen. Get a vision for someone. Invest. Be generous, because you do not know what the implications, what the impact of that might be. Have a faith and expectation of what God can do. Don't just believe for a book for yourself, but actually believe for someone else too. So just encourage you, go out and get that and get a vision for it. Now, we had this amazing excerpt before this message today, all about our miracle that we saw at Coningsby Street. I was there at the time and it's so amazing to hear that story retold and get my faith reignited. But I think one of the things that comes across in this story so powerfully is it is a David and Goliath story. You've got this little church, this little organization. We don't even own this building against this government-backed superpower that can basically say, we will demand to buy your property. Doesn't matter how much you've invested in it. Doesn't matter how much you've done with the property, because we're going to build a road. We're going to rip it down, even if you put every penny you've got into that building. And yet, David overcame Goliath. We saw a victory. We saw that provision. And it was just the most amazing thing that God did through that story, and I hope it inspired and ignited you. But it really is a David and Goliath story. It is a tale of overcoming against the odds, and that's just one of many in the book where we have these encounters where we come against challenges and we overcome them. And I think that it's so encouraging to see how God does that again and again in the story of our church, which you can read all about in the Firestarters book. But this David and Goliath story, I thought we need to talk about it. We need to come and hear some of that scripture, because this story, this David and Goliath story, it is as famous with non-Christians as it is with Christians. There is something about this story that has resonated for thousands of years, for generations, And so I want us to look at the scriptures today. So if you're here for the first time in church today, be encouraged, because you probably know a little bit about this story already. And we're so glad that you joined us today for this series. But we're going to talk a little bit about the original story. What does the Bible actually say about David and Goliath? And we find this story in the book of Samuel in the Old Testament, where we hear about this whole scene that goes on. And what's happened is the Philistines have invaded Israel territory. And it's a battle between the Philistines versus the Israelites. So two camps are set up on two hills. You've got the Philistines on one side, the Israelites on the other. And then there's a valley in between where they foresee a battle taking place. But what happens, rather than two armies fighting one another and going at it, a duel is proposed. Instead of the two armies fighting, what if our great fighter and your great fighter represent both armies, and whoever wins, that will dictate where the victory is, rather than both armies going to battle. So I want to read this in 1 Samuel 17 from verses 8 to 11 and tell some of this story, okay? Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. "Why are you all coming out to fight?" he called. "I am the Philistine champion, but you are only the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me." When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. This guy we have in the Bible tells us he's about 9 feet tall. He's this monster. He's this beast. But also the Bible tells us he declares himself, "I'm the Philistine champion. I'm the one that's overcome the most battles. I'm the one who's seen victories. I'm an experienced warrior." And he would come and he would give this taunt. He would come and trash talk, and the Israelites were terrified. They'd come and they'd line up for battle, and he would come and present himself, and they would be in fear because of the size and the power of this champion. So we've got this classic story that you know. This is getting a little bit more detailed to what maybe you understood as just a phrase, a David and Goliath story. Here is the man himself, towering in power. And the thing about this, it goes on for 40 days and 40 nights. That means that he's coming in the morning and the evening and giving a similar kind of speech, provoking them, challenging them, insulting them, until one of them will come forward. But as time goes on, week by week, day by day, evening by morning, nobody comes forward from the Israelites. They are all quaking in their boots. They're all fearing for their lives, and no one is willing to step up until our guy, David, enters the story. Here comes the hero, David himself. Now, David is visiting his brothers on the battle line. His father sent him to run an errand. He's like, "Look, I want you to go check in on your brothers," because David is a shepherd. That's what he does day by day. He looks after sheep. But I want you to go and lead those sheep with another shepherd. Go and check in on your brothers, and I want you to deliver some bread to your brothers, and I want you to take some cheese to the captain. So the captain gets 10 cheeses. So he's obviously, they're looking after the captain here. I mean, that's a good day right there. But David is simply running an errand. He's got a small task, and he's meant to be checking up on his brothers. And that's how he enters the scene. He's not meant to be at the battle. He wasn't entitled to be there. He was too young to be there. He's the sandwich delivery boy sent to give some rations to the actual warriors. So, David, you're not really a warrior, so you're just going to go and serve the warriors that are there. But he turns up, delivers his lunch, delivers the food, and then starts to hear Goliath making this taunt, making these horrible claims and these accusations and these insults against his people and his God. And David can't believe that this is unfolding. He's surprised. How is this going on? He's surprised. It's like, something needs to be done about this Philistine. And Saul, the king of Israel, had already put out to his men, look, if anyone's willing to take this warrior on. If anyone's willing to go and face Goliath, there's a whole heap of things, a whole heap of spoils that I will give that man. He doesn't have to pay the taxes, him and his family, for the rest of his life. I mean, that one alone is pretty good. But also, he's obviously going to be remembered as the champion of Israel. But no one is willing to take on this looming giant. No one's willing to step up. Everyone's feeling reluctant. Everyone's doubting themselves. But David has something different about him. So David starts to talk to the others and say, what is this about? There's going to be some kind of reward for someone who takes care of this Goliath, this giant. And so he starts to talk and ask questions. And his brother hears him asking about what the reward is. So it says in verse 28, in chapter 17, verse 28, but when David's oldest brother, Eliab, heard David talking to the men, he was angry. What are you doing here anyway? He demanded. What about those few sheep that you're supposed to be taking care of? I know about your pride and deceit. You just want to see the battle. Wow. What a response from your big bro. What a put down. I know if my sons heard that, they're like, what a burn. David was a shepherd and he was there just to run an errand, but he sees the giant and he starts talking as if he's going to take care of the problem. David is thought to be about 16 years old here, not a warrior, but a shepherd. And he wants to take on a seasoned champion. Just getting that into your head right now. This kid, he turns up with all the warriors there and he starts giving it the big talk. Like, yeah, I'll take him on. Yeah, what's in it for the man that will take care of him? And his brother hears him down and hears him saying this and puts him down, puts him in his place. And I think it's funny how audacity is often mistaken for arrogance. Because there is this audacity in David to say, I think we can deal with this problem. I think that if God is on our side, who can be against us? I think that God has given me the strength, power, and grace to overcome this giant. But instead of being seen for the faith and audacity that it was, it's mistaken as arrogance. And I can't tell you how much I can relate to this story, because there have been other Christians that have tried to put us down, to put us in our place over the years. There's even been people within our community that have said, you just need to watch yourself. You're just being arrogant, when we were being audacious. Let's believe that we can change the world. Let's believe that we can do something extraordinary. Let's believe that God is really who he says he is. And someone tried to put us in our place. And you've got to be really careful to the voices you listen to and be sure not to dampen the spirit and the fire that God has placed within you. And I even want to speak to some people right now. Maybe you've had that fire quashed, quieted. Well, today, I just pray that this story and this message starts to ignite your faith to believe for the more. Don't let those claims of arrogance or those words or mantles that other people want to put upon you define you, because God has called you to be audacious. That is part of your nature. That is being a Christian. And yet the world doesn't like that. They call it arrogance. They call it big-headedness or making about ourselves. But no, we believe in the God within us. That's what makes us different. That's what made David stand out from the crowd, is this audacity that actually God is greater than the size of the enemy that stands before us. As David starts to talk like this, and it starts to actually come back to Saul, the king, and they hear of the conversations that David has been having with the men, because these conversations are so different that David is having. What's the reward? I think I can do something about it. That's the idea, I think, of how he's speaking. It gets back to the king. And so the king himself calls upon David to come and see him, because he wants to speak with David and hear David for himself. And in verse 32, it says, David said to Saul, Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. I just think that when we lose that audacity, that fire, that spirit, the way that we're called to be, we can lose heart. Here's the young man, here's the shepherd, here's the 16-year-old telling the seasoned king, the one that has been a warrior, the one that has gone to battle, hey, let no one lose heart. I love this about David. And Saul replied, you're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man. And he has been a warrior from his youth. What Saul deemed to be a weakness, this thing of him being a young man, was actually the very thing that was going to make David so different. It was the very thing that made him stand out from the rest of all the people on the battlefield, because he was young, he was youthful. He didn't have that experience that tainted him, that cynicism, that negativity. Some would label it as wisdom, but it's actually become cynicism within them. But David didn't have that. He'd never been to a battle like this before. He had faith and audacity. And so Saul's saying, hey, you're only a young man, but that's what made him so different. David was a young, energetic shepherd, and there was this nimbleness and youth. When we look at Goliath and the description of him, he is this powerful, strong giant wearing this huge armor. But it made him sluggish. It made him difficult to move. He was powerful. If he hit you, it was over. But the difference was that David had this youth and speed on his side. So the very thing that Saul calls out as a weakness, David is going to win the battle because of it. And I think of what Saul says, and I just want to cross out these words. It says, you are able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are a young man. These things, this truth, imagine if the king had come to him and instead of trying to take away his audacity, actually added to it. Said, yes, the reason that you could go and do this is because you're a young man. There's a youthfulness in you to take on this Goliath, to take on this giant. In verses 34 to 37, it says, but David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. So this is his comeback. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it. I struck it and I rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair. I struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he's defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Past victory fuels courage to win. Past victory fuels the courage to win. And I just want to encourage you, right? Even as we see David in this story, what he's saying is, I fought a lion, I fought a bear, and I beat them both. And so that's why I come to you with confidence today, because I know that God's with me and I know I can overcome this foe. And I want to encourage you, you've got to look back regularly on the moments that God has broken through in your life. One of the things I often think about is you've got to commemorate them in your home. If there's a picture or a memento that you can put in your house that's going to remind you of victory that God has won in your life, you need to have them around you, because we so easily get caught up in moments of our present and forget what God has done. We see that happen to the Israelites time and time again as they go through the Old Testament, and God keeps reminding them and bringing them back to, I was the God who brought you out of Egypt, who broke you free from slavery, who brought you through the Red Sea, because they so easily forget what God did for them and delivered them from. And I think that in our humanity, we're the same. We forget what God has done, but we want to remember it. That's why this book is so important to read, because you can take faith from the fact that God gave us the strength as our community, as our church family, to kill off the lion, to kill off the bear, to overcome this struggle, to see this miracle. And it's going to fuel your faith for tomorrow because of what God did yesterday. And that's what we have happening in this story here. David is saying, look, this is what God's done before. I killed the lion. I killed the bear. And this is enough to convince Saul. It says in verses 37 to 40, Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. He's changed his tune. We need to come and really be confident in who God has called us to be. It says, then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. So it's like the king's got this idea, okay, if you're going to go through with this, we've got to at least make you look like a warrior. We've got to try and, impress our own troops and give them confidence. We've got to try and impress the Philistines as you step out as our representative, as our ambassador. You've got to look a bit more like a warrior because David looked like a shepherd. He was wearing simple clothing. He was not dressed for battle. And there was something about, don't embarrass us. At least try and look the part. Hey, you can wear the king's armor. But David couldn't even walk around in them. He says, I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I'm not used to them. So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. You can't be audacious by trying to be someone else. You have to back who God made you to be. And it's funny sometimes how people try to put on us a certain representation. Hey, be this way. But actually, we've got to be who God called us to be. And when we have that audacity rise up in us, you can often feel people just trying to take the edges off some of that wildfire, some of that passion. But if I ever see some audacity or fire or faith in some people that I'm leading, sometimes I think, I wonder if that's wise. I wonder if they're going to step out in the wrong direction there. But I try to stop myself from giving that advice because actually I want to stir fire in them. And if they've got faith for something big, who am I to step in the way and try and take the edges off that? And in fact, I try and go the other way where I'm like, hey, you need to believe for more. I want to stir your faith. God can do something that you're not asking for. You need to believe and ask for more in your life because God is waiting to do it. God was waiting to bring victory against Goliath. But David was the one that was willing to believe that God could use him. So David steps up to Goliath, and it says in verses 42 to 43, he looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Even Goliath feels disrespected by this mismatch. He's waited for all this time, 40 days, to have a fight. And he gets served up this boy who it comes with his shepherd's staff in his hand. It's like, this is not what I had in mind. And it fires Goliath up. You just made the giant mad. But then in verses 45 to 47, it says, David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and I'll cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it's not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. What a speech. What a moment where this young warrior, imagine you stepped up, but it's like the heart's beating in the chest. But he gives this speech in front of both armies, in front of Goliath. Such is the audacity, threatening Goliath. It's like, hey, I'm not just taking you down, all of the army behind you, they're all going down. And he makes this statement. And I want you to take this away from David, from this truth. You got to say it before you see it. You got to say it before you see it. Now, there is something about, hey, you got to back up what you say and you got to carry it through. But there is such power in our words. I just think of, if you want to be someone who's audacious, like we heard in the Coningsby Street story, like we hear with David, is you've got to come and you've got to say it before you see it. I think that sometimes we're like, well, let's just wait and see. That's not faith. That's not audacity. That's a risk-free life. That's trying to save face. That's not the life that God called us to, church. We are called as Christians to say it before we see it, to pray it before we see it, to speak it out, to declare the victory before it happens. So we got to start getting verbal. We got to start getting vocal with what God is going to do, speaking out faith, speaking out declaration, speaking out who God is over a situation, taking the promises of his word and speaking them out over our circumstances, over the circumstances of our friends, our family around us. Because we are called to have this heart of audacity bursting out from us, just like David. And the reason this story is so famous is that David runs down to the battle line. He takes his sling and he thrusts a stone right into Goliath's head and he knocks him over. He goes up to Goliath, cuts his head off with Goliath's sword, and he wins the victory. And it's the most amazing story because the odds were against him. Quite incredible. But what does this ancient story, what does this mean for us in 2022? I want to tell you, you've got to be a scrapper. You've got to be a fighter. If you want to be audacious, if you want to follow in the footsteps of this great story, not just in the Bible, but the great story of our church that God has written around the world, you've got to come ready for a fight. You've got to come ready to be audacious. You don't win by being a pretender. You don't win by being a pretender. I think about these Israelite army standing on the one hill versus the Philistine army on the other hill. And what happened every day is they would get dressed for battle and they would line up at the battle line. Right, okay, maybe today's the day. Maybe the fight's on. And they would get, and the Bible in 1 Samuel 17 even tells us, they would give a battle cry. They would try and rouse the troops. But no one was willing to fight. And I thought about this as I was preparing this message, and I thought, wow, isn't that a picture sometimes of how the church can be? We can get dressed for battle. We can even get on the battle line. We can stir up a war cry, and then we can actually not do a thing. We cannot go into battle. These guys, they were all noise and no substance. They were pretenders. And I want to encourage us, church. You want to be someone who's audacious. You can't just be a pretender. You can't just be there on the front row. You can't just generate the noise and the passion and then go out and not practice the things of God that are within you through your week and impact the people in your life. Be offering to pray for someone. Be offering to step out, pray for healing. Declaring the gospel over someone, sharing your testimony. That's audacity. But if we just come and make all the noise on a Sunday and then it doesn't ripple out through our lives, then there's something of pretense about that. Let's be the authentic, audacious people that God has called us to be. There are warriors right now watching this, and I pray that God would stir that faith within you, that audacity within you, that boldness within you. I just love in the Coningsby Street story where G is not threatened or intimidated by, hey, you could lose everything. It's a big risk, but he decides to go into it head on and say, okay, God, we trust you. We believe in you. We know that more than the government power, actually, you're on our side. And we believe that you've called us to take this building on. That audacity to back up what you believe and what you say. That's what we all need to continue to persevere and practice in our lives. You don't win without risks. You don't win without risks. There's this moment where G decides, right, we're going to sign the lease, we're going to get planning permission, and we're going to start to invest all the money that we have in Coningsby Street. Now, Coningsby Street was going to be a key staging ground for us to plant churches all over the world. It was going to be that platform that we would go from. It was such an important thing for us to have that building. We trained our first academy students there, our first church planters. But there was this moment of, right, risk. All the chips are in. God, we trust you. We believe in you. And that risk wasn't averted by, next week, it turned out okay. Actually, it went on month by month, even actually went on for over a year where we didn't know, could this be taken from us? Could this be retracted? Could we lose everything? The risk was ongoing. And I think that so many of us, we like the idea of being audacious and stepping out, but we don't want to risk losing face. We don't want to risk investment. We don't want to risk reputation. But actually, there are no rewards without risk. You've got to step out. You've got to put yourself out there. I think of David, who was risking his life to be audacious. It wasn't just like, hey, I'll be audacious from here and someone else can risk. Actually, I'm going to stand in that firing line before this mighty warrior from another nation. But that's audacity. And then David sees great reward from that as he overcomes Goliath. I want to also tell you this, that great victory begins by asking audacious questions. Great victory begins by asking audacious questions. I think of how in this story, David turns up and he just starts asking, what's going to be done for the person that overcomes Goliath? And he starts asking this question, and it gets back to the king because of the audacity of even asking the question. It's like, sorry, you think you're going to be involved in this? And it makes its way back to the king. And I think of Pastor G and Pastor H as they go through the book and they ask these audacious questions. What if we could make a difference? What if we could get that building in Coningsby Street and actually go up against this government threat that we've had about buying back our building, but we would still see an overcoming of that situation? You've got to start by asking those questions. I want to say to you right now, what questions are you asking right now? What audacious request are you coming before God and asking of him? There's this extraordinary moment in the New Testament where two of the disciples are coming to Jesus, James and John, and they are saying to him, hey, can we sit on the right and the left hand of you in heaven? Like basically, we want the best seats in heaven. We want the seats of power, authority, respect. We want the greatest reward. Hey, is that okay with you? And I'm expecting Jesus is like going to be fired up. He's going to be slamming them down. He's going to be rebuking them because it's like, it's full of self and you're after your position. But Jesus doesn't rebuke them. He doesn't give them the answer they're expecting. But there's something about the faith that they have that is expressed in that moment, that audacity, that actually Jesus, that's what he's looking for. And the moments that he rebukes the disciples, when he gets frustrated, when he gets fired up, he's like, you have little faith. Why don't you believe? And I just think of all the people across our church right now, and I think about the requests that you're making. What are you asking of God? What are you believing for? What's the last prayer that you prayed that scared you? I want to share this verse with you in Matthew 7, verses 7 to 8, and these are the words of Jesus. Keep on asking, and you will receive what you ask for. Keep on seeking, and you will find. Keep on knocking and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, everyone who seeks finds, and everyone who knocks, the door will be opened. But I've found through my years of building church that we're often like, hey, I'm good. I'm okay. Actually, I'm settled right now. God, I don't actually need you for anything right now. And the times that we come to God are when we need him the most. But I want to stoke that audacious ask within you today, church. What are you asking for right now? It's like, I want to overcome that giant. I want to see that giant fall. Maybe it's something to do with your finances. Maybe it's something to do with your health. Maybe it's something to do with salvation for a family member, a friend. Maybe it's something to do with your job. Maybe it's something to do with building the kingdom in Saltwinds, our media arm of our church. Maybe there's something else, but it's like, what are you believing for that's audacious? It's like, okay, that was pretty out there. Because if we're not praying prayers like that, we are not utilizing the faith that is within us. It's like we've got all this potential, all this power, all this capacity, but it's got to be executed. It's got to be used. And I think of these men that all stood on the battle line. They all had the same God that David did, but they weren't accessing the power and the purpose that was within them. And what makes this story so different, this Firestarter story, I think that is because we had senior pastors that said, we really believe God is who he says he is. And so we're going to start living like it and putting a demand on his promises and start walking in ways that are audacious, believing for the more that God can do. Imagine what our church could look like if that wasn't just our senior pastors or a few leaders or a few individuals here and there, but every single one of us believing for audacious things. I want to share this quote with you from the book. As I was preparing this message, I just wanted to reabsorb some of the book. And one of the things, because we've got story in there, but we've also got teaching. We've got this quote from Pastor G, and it says this: "Many Christians treat their faith like a child comfort blanket. It's a bit smelly and wet. It makes them feel more at ease, helping them go to sleep. To live with audacity is nothing like a comfort blanket. Instead of comforting you, it can terrify you." And I think of how when we've stepped out in faith over the years, it's like we are getting out of the boat and walking on water. It's like, and there's waves crashing around us. And it's like, you better keep your eyes on Jesus, because there is something that we could be intimidated right now because we're risking something, we're stepping out. But that's the people that we're called to be, church. That's what makes us freedom. We are that punching above our weight church. That's one of our DNA. And it's all about audacious faith. Even in that DNA, it says we're giant killers. That's our heritage. That's our inheritance. As you read this book, it's like almost reading the family line. It's like, hey, that's what I come out of. That's who God has called me to be too. And I just want to stoke and fire you into that audacity today as this message lands on your heart. What are you praying for? What are you asking for? What are you believing for? Our world loves an underdog story. This is the ultimate, probably oldest underdog story we have in the world. David and Goliath. But whether it comes to sports, whether it comes to health, someone overcoming their odds against health, in business, these always make amazing films. They always make inspiring stories because someone came up against the odds. And the only way you get to write a story like that is that you put yourself up against something far bigger than you, that you couldn't possibly do in your own strength. That's the only way you get to be a part of this narrative where we write a story that is so much bigger than we could ever do by ourselves. It is only God. But you've got to then start facing up to some things that are far bigger than you. How can you punch above your weight? You've got to go in a bigger weight class. You've got to believe for more. You've got to take on something more. You've got to get audacious against something that looks perhaps intimidating to everyone else. But you believe that God can use you, that God's power is in you, that actually if you come and you stand in faith that all things are possible through the name of Jesus. So I want to ask you once more as we finish this message, what are you asking for right now? What are you believing for? What giants are you going up against? What can you see God overcome if you'd only step out in audacity? Don't stay with that comfort blanket faith, but come and get that faith that causes you to stir and step out against every giant, against everything that seems to loom or intimidate. You can step up in Jesus' name. So I pray every single one of you watching this message today, I pray that God would stir and ignite you to believe for more and to go after his kingdom purposes, because God is ready and willing to answer those prayers. In that scripture I prayed, it's that the one that keeps knocking, the one that keeps asking. Just because you ask once, don't let it stop you from asking again. Knock again, ask again, seek again. And his promise for you today is you will find it. You will be answered, but you've got to go and pursue it. You've got to go and fight for it. So bless you, church. I'll hand over now to all of your location leaders.
Thank you very much for joining us today. If you would love to reach out and respond to this message, we would love to hear from you. If you're watching on Facebook, just write in the comments and we will get in touch with you. Or you can send us an email at hello@freedomchurch.cc. We would love to hear from you and love to hear how this message impacted your life. See you next time. Bye.